What's up, it's your boy NicholassRivas. I talk about stuff and stuff. We're avoiding politics this week, so fuck it. Let's just rank all the Rick and Morty episodes. For this video, I'm just going to talk about the least favorite 10 to my favorite 10. Number 71, Rick Dependent Spray. I don't think it's a controversial to say this, that everyone hates this episode. The titles for these Rick and Morty episodes are really annoying. So just to give a quick summary, this is the sperm baby episode. I don't like this episode. I think the sperm stuff is gross. I'm okay with gross out humor, especially with animation. I feel like it's really easy to gross people out in animation. Like I look at stuff like Mr. Pickles and that stuff rubs me the wrong way more than like any other real life show or scary movie or horror stuff that I've seen. I feel like I can watch a Saw, but animation when it comes to being gross just pisses me off. Number 70, Gotron, Jerry Sis, Rick Vangelion. It's just a giant incest baby part 2. It pisses me off. Even the subplot with like aliens that do the narration and the Gotron robots, it's not that funny. I was kind of just hoping they went to Boob World and they didn't. And so the whole episode I was like, well, this kind of just sucks. And it's just an extension of the gross humor. Not as bad as a sperm episode because there's not giant sperms, but it's just not good. And I don't like it. I never go back to watching it. If anything, I see it pop up and it just pisses me off and I skip it. Number 69, Rise of the Numericons. It's okay. I would feel more comfortable putting it middle if it just wasn't so whatever. There's middle of the road episodes that have like a really good story and maybe the subplot is whatever or vice versa. This one is just kind of all around meh, and it's so that I just can't put it higher than anything else. It's fine, it's funny. I'm not invested at all, and I feel like the characters are kind of a shell of their former self. So I don't recommend this episode. I wouldn't show this to a lot of people. Number 68, How Poopy Got His Poop Back. I know this was a transitional moment for the show, given that the Exodus really threw off everybody. And I think we see a lot of this with Dan Harmon shows. There's not a Dan Harmon show without crazy stuff behind the scenes. For the show itself, it really took a weird turn when the first episode premiered for the new season. And it just felt like it didn't really hit any points that I think anybody wanted to see. I think people like Mr. Poopy Butthole, but to see him in the full show besides the original episode he appeared in, it's just okay. And I don't think that's necessarily that bad, but given that it was the new season and everybody was excited to see how the show would continue, I think it really fumbled. It's okay. I think the whole episode can be watched without that much serious looking into. But as the context shows, it's a new season. It's post all the drama. And it has a character I think people were curious about, Mr. Poopy Butthole having a full episode, yet it just fails. So I think that's why it's so high for me. It's not that bad of an episode. A lot of these middle of the road episodes, like I said, have some high points, and this one as well. But it's just as a whole in the context and everything, it was a shitty opener, given that Rick and Morty has some great openings for their seasons. Number 67. Rick and Morty's Thanksploitation. I feel it's like a misstep for the show. It's not like a total mess up spiral. I think it just feels like they knew they had to do a Thanksgiving episode, or they felt like they wanted to, and the story was there and it has some good moments, but I think it drags on too long. The turkey stuff isn't as gross, but it also isn't as entertaining. It would have been funny if they played more into it, but honestly, this is sort of a symptom of the show itself. You had such really good episodes that these sort of mediocre episodes are so on the bottom because they're just okay. And you have some really good episodes that excel and at some points, whereas this one, I think the final part really made me laugh, and that was really it. Number 66. A Morty Ken, Grick Fitty. It's a funny episode. I actually like the Jerry stuff. It just felt like it dragged on a lot. It felt like they were trying to fill in space because the Jerry subplot is really fun. And even then, the Jerry subplot doesn't also hold up by the time they get to the end of his story and like the pain stuff. It kind of dragged out its course. Like I didn't really care enough to see it more. I really like just seeing them making fun of Jerry at the beginning, and it was, you know, a hoot and a holler at that bar. And I kind of was hoping they spent more time there. Diving in more to like the Hellraiser stuff was cool, but it did not last long. Number 65. Big Trouble and Little Sanchez. This is one I think I'm gonna get some heat on. I don't like Little Rick. I think it's a dumb story. I think it's not funny. As I watch it again and again, it doesn't have this repeat value. It's not a terrible episode per se, but I just don't care. And really what brings it up is the side plot. That's the most entertaining part. I like seeing Jerry and Beth do their thing in this episode particularly, and they could get annoying, but it was actually really entertaining. All the Rick stuff, though, just made me go, it's funny. And then I never really cared for going back to it. It's one of those episodes where I feel like it's a perfect example of how good Rick and Morty is that you have a really good episode here for many other shows, but it's definitely mediocre when it comes to all these other emotional highs, all these entertaining highs, funny highs, whereas this is just I really like the beginning when they focused on the count stuff. Number 64, Mortiplicity. The Azimuth Cascade is a really interesting story. It's a really fun thing to go back to and watch, and it's just funny to see this loop. It just becomes so repetitive and loopy, and then it makes it kind of question the whole universe as a whole. Should we always be looking over our shoulder that there's a clone family coming? Again, they probably don't want you to take it seriously, but I feel like a show that sometimes can really take itself seriously and follow the rules of the show kind of dropped the ball here. Number 63, Full Metal Jacket. The story is funny and it's a really interesting take. I love the third wall breaks, but it becomes too Deadpool-y where it's just so much third wall and so much trying to subvert expectation, where it just, I feel like you're not telling a story anymore. You're just trying to avoid telling a story by saying, hey, look guys, we're the writers, we're making fun of ourselves. This just felt repetitive, and I think that's a big common issue with the Rick and Morty is these episodes, even though they're not the longest 1 hour long episodes, they do become repetitive if the landing isn't stuck right away. These premises sound kind of cool on paper and then they just kind of drag out. Number 62, Anella's Piss. Like I said, don't like the gross out humor. I think gross out humor gets really annoying. It's fun and it can be done well. I think this is the most tasteful way you could have a piss villain. And I think that being said, if it wasn't Piss, I would have really liked this episode. But I think that also takes from the character Pissmaster is funny because of how absurd it is. You see it too when Rick has to fight all these other villains in the midst of the episode. You know, it's like a cookie monster man who's like Magneto. It's funny, right? That's the premise. But as for like the serious part where he's dealing with this man's suicide, it was actually really thought-provoking. And I really liked that scene, but it keeps taking me back. It's like, oh, Rick is basically in someone else's piss. That's disgusting. So it comes in as a reminder and it kind of ruins it. But it's still fun. I think it's still entertaining. And even though this is one of my least favorite episodes, it's still better than the worst ones. And I give Rick and Morty nothing but credit for that. That their worst ones are typically pretty good for TV standard. Number 10, the Rick Lantis mix-up. I like the political stuff. I like this, like, looking into the lore more. And it's just a cool premise, like, seeing this different world, getting this, like, different view and the Training Day stuff and how Morty interacts with Rick's in different worlds. And, you know, it leads up to, it's not only, like, a pretty good setup episode, it's a pretty good episode on itself. And I find myself going back to it a lot. I think it really sticks to me. I think it's a pretty good political conversation episode, which is funny because this episode is obviously hitting the points of many have said before. They're not saying anything that different, but it's how they do it that's really exciting, really fun, and you always find something new when going back to it. I think this is where the writers really do well, is these different worlds they can jump into, and they really find a way to hone in and relate it to our current world. And I think it's done well. I don't think it's done as like a middle schooler telling you how much they understand political science. I think it's as someone who is really looking at it at a nuanced lens. And I just think it's really fun, even if you don't like the political stuff, even if you hate everything else. I think it's just a good episode all around with great writing and good jokes and really entertaining and really good shocking twists. Number 9, Rick C. Business. I love this episode. I think this is the perfect way to really encapsulate what the show is. And I think showing this fun world, you get so many lore introductions for characters that are now staples. You have so much interactions that make the characters really fun and inviting and exciting. Even the subplot is not the strongest, I still enjoy it so much. And I think it's a really good episode. And I always look at this as like a pinnacle of like, this is how you show the world of a show. You have the pilot episode, and then you have these episodes that show what the typical adventures could look like, and some that kind of subvert expectations. And then you have the final episode that really shows the world and shows what it's capable of. Number 8, autoerotic assimilation. So I love Unity as a character. I think it's such a cool premise. And even just when you have to show her as a character, having her being that like politician president character is so fun. It's just, I love every way they do the episode. I love the introduction of the character. I love that first part of the episode. I love how the kids interact with Rick. I also love seeing Rick at his lowest. This is where we see the show really take itself seriously, even though the premise is crazy. It's kind of taken as like a laugh of sorts, but then you start going like, oh man, like they're being serious. Like this is a man suffering with really deep depression, and even though it's played for jokes, in a sense, it's still taken seriously, and the music emphasizes that. I think it's really good television, and I look at Rick and Morty as a standard for how adult animation can be taken seriously, but still have fun with itself. Number 7, Total Recall. This episode really is a mind fuck, and it makes you feel like terrible when you think about all the repercussions. Imagine killing your family members that were never your family members, but you only remember good things. And also the way to defeat the family members is to defeat them by only remembering good things. Like if you have a bad memory, which is such a sobering thought. So yeah, I think overall, like, it's just a really cool premise. It's a cool way to defeat the enemies, and even though the entire episode could theoretically get repetitive, it's always just a fun turn, and I'm always seeing new creative characters. So yeah, I love that episode so much. Number 6, Close Encounters of the Rick Kind. This is the introduction of the Rick Council, and it's a really good episode. I think it really paints the show again. You can see a kind of a pattern for me is I really like these episodes that dive into the lore, really paint a cool picture, make it a fun episode still. And I think it's something that you can see the start of the show. Besides the party episode, this is a start of like, this world is huge, every character is interesting, and it just comes back. You come back to this episode and think like, look how far we've come. It's a really cool episode. It's a really fun idea, and it just really lays the ground of why the first season and all the episodes in the early seasons were so damn good. Number 5, Fear No More. Very much one of my favorite episodes. I want to put it even higher as the more I think about it, but I think these other episodes are so pivotal and they expand the universe even more, where this is just a really well done episode that shows the loving side of Rick, but also just the amazing depth the writers understand of someone's psyche. I think when you see the fearfulness of one as a human, you understand them a little bit more. And I think that's why they took this premise. It's a scary, atmospheric episode that has really fun characters, has really fun approaches to the whole, but it's more so just the thought of losing your humanity and having fear be something that I guess you can never really overcome. It's just kind of innate in us. And I don't know, I think it's this funny thing to be dependent on someone, and that fear of losing them is probably the greatest fear that I think any human could ever have. And it's something I don't think gets ever talked about in any media, both animation and non-animation. So I don't know. It's up there. It's an episode that it honestly gives me a little bit of comfort when I go back and watch it. Maybe it's the atmosphere. Maybe it's them at the Denny's. But I always find myself going back to this episode. And I think I really respect the writers. And it still shows that this show is up there. It can hold itself with all these other shows when it comes to the depth of the topics. So yeah. Number 4, Unmortarican. I love this episode. I think this episode just shows more to the story, and that's why I'm so deep in it. And I think I like the previous episode even more than this one, but I think just expanding the lore is what really keeps me going back to it. And I think the funness of the episode, but also just the final closure. I think this is a season that you could end on because it hit all the points you needed to. Maybe one more season for Rick and Morty. I'm hearing that they have like 5 or 6 seasons lined up. I think you have 1 or 2. This episode shows it. You had the closure. You know where Rick stands, even though Morty can use this device and hurt Rick even more than the evil Rick did. I think the reality of it is Morty's gone. That guy he's done with the story. And I think that's the beauty of the show, is you don't need this like overarching theme that we've been chasing for all these seasons to really continue and get further closure. I think 1 or 2 seasons could wrap this show up in a nice, neat bow. They probably won't take that, and so I think personally, if the next season is asked, this is where you could end it. These episodes are so creative, so well done, and it's funny that it wasn't even like the last episode of the season. Nothing but respect. I like that they actually did it. You could have kept lingering and saying like, when are we gonna find Prime? And they just said, fuck it. No, like, we're gonna show it. And it's the whole episode just creative, from how they meet up, how they work together, how they fight. It's just so good. It's all around good. Again, it's probably like, I would put other episodes above it, but I think for what it does for the show, it makes it worth it, and it's just a good episode. Number 3, Rest and Relaxation. This is funny. This is an episode I feel like people don't give enough love to. I feel really connected to this episode. I think it's just a good episode, but on a deeper level, to overanalyze it, when Morty is talking about love, that's a beautiful quote, and the way he approaches it. Also, the toxicity being such a beneficial thing for humans. This isn't a groundbreaking episode, but I think it's just perfect, and I think it's so well done. And if you want to just look at it like a fun episode of seeing a naked Rick fight slimy Rick, it's funny. But as a human looking at this at an over analytical angle, I think it's actually more than that, and I love that you can take it. And also, just saying some of the quotes that I say in my everyday life that I continue to say because of this episode, is this organic? I'm always saying that, because of this goddamn episode. I'm always going back because of this goddamn episode. That last part where he's talking about the Voltron robots, it's so fucking funny. I love it. I love it. I love it so much. And I always stick with that quote. I loved you so much, you didn't have to love me back. That is so fucking powerful and such a great story. And shows Rick loving Morty and shows Jessica loving Morty. It shows that these characters are important to each other. And it's just well done. I really can't give it enough praise. I always just find myself going back. Again, even though it's not groundbreaking, even though it doesn't add to the lore like crazy, it's just a good episode that really shows you that these writers taking care of this craft seriously. Number 2, the Rick Shake Redemption. I think having this being an opening for the season is why every season is so strong. Rick and Morty has one thing that I think everyone can agree on, excluding the last season. Every opening of the show, every season premiere has been banger. This is one of those that is just so good. To see a little bit of the backstory, to see how the characters interact, to see how Rick gets out of it, to see the fun, aftermath of that crazy season that you just saw. It's just a good damn show, and this shows it. Like, you have amazing writing, you have characters that you relate to, and you have a story that's enthralling. It knows when to take itself seriously. And it was premiering on April Fool's. I saw it live on Facebook. I was like half awake watching it. I needed to wake up for school the next day, and I was still like watching it because it was just a fun experience to be part of. I love the show, and I love how they take these approaches, and I think this is one of those episodes that shows how the show can keep going and show why it kept going. This is an example of great TV, how to write characters, and how to show what the next season entails. Like, this season is like a standard. This episode is a standard for the entire series. Number 1, the Wedding Squanchers. It's a final. It's one of the best finals. You see why Rick is so close. And we get a little piece of that throughout the show. You see where he lost X, Y, and Z person. But what really shows his pain is how he has this target on his back. You can use Morty's speech about how people don't really belong anywhere as a really good example of how the show has this theme of like, does stuff really matter? Rick passed down the genes of how much hatred he had. You just see a man who's hurt, and you see a little bit more of why he was hurt. And I think it was done well. With an entertaining episode, you see these twists, like Tammy being a spy. It's just so freaking good and well done. And I don't think the show could ever get back to something like this. Even with the top episodes I listed, there was something always missing, and still missing with the show, that these first original seasons just had. And there's a reason why not as much people love the show as they used to. I think it's because something about these episodes were so key to both painting the characters and how great they were, and the stakes of the story. I don't think the show is bad by any means, but we will never recapture that magic of like seeing the wedding, seeing the twist, seeing Bird Person get shot, seeing them go to the little tiny planet, seeing that finale with the song. The show knows itself. The show knows how to portray the pain and suffering that the characters say they feel. How do you portray that? How do you show a distrustful character is not just paranoid? How do you show a family that's broken and why they keep going back to this man? An abusive relationship. Yet, how do you make that all still fun? How do you make it an entertaining action sci-fi thriller and goofy sci-fi thriller at that? And that's how you do it, is with episodes like this. I know there's episodes like the Vat of Acid episode that have like Emmys and Peabody Awards, but this episode I think is always going to be neglected because it's like a typical season finale. It's this crazy stakes and it's crazy stuff, but it's done so well, executed, and it bleeds in so perfectly, and it makes other episodes really stick out because you look back and see why. And I really respect this. I respect this episode. I respect the show. And I'm glad they've given us some pretty solid seasons, even though it's probably not as strong as it used to be. It's a show that I respect, and it's morphed. I think many of people, I don't think you would have a Smiling Friends without a Rick and Morty. And yeah,